There was a knock at the door, and Irina, dressed in a grey pinstripe suit with her hair up and carrying a briefcase, came in and sat down next to Kirill. Villiers looked astonished and jumped up. "Irina, what on earth are you doing here?" "I'm here to represent Sergei Vasilyev, Gilbert. I'm afraid he can't be here. He was thrown off his balcony in Doshk last Friday night." Welcome to Behind the Bottom Line. I'm James Schofield, the creator, voice artist and prompt engineer all in one for this podcast, which is based around stories that I originally wrote for different magazines and publishers. This is season 9, and we are now in episode 13 of a thriller set in the diamond industry called 7 Continents. So, we are reaching the end of our story. Where have we got to so far? Well, it's time for a showdown. Kirill, Macey and Irina have collected the evidence they need and have invited Gilbert Villiers and the unsuspecting Roy Marsden to a meeting at the Eco Warriors offices in London. But will Gilbert believe that his best friend has been working against him? And will 7 Continents still get that contract to mine for diamonds in Antarctica from the United Nations? So, fasten your seatbelts and get ready to find out. Chapter 25. Facing the Facts. When Sir Gilbert Villiers came into the meeting room with Roy Marsden and Carly Fiorentina, he looked bad. Macey could see that he had not slept much in the last week. Marsden fussed around him and ordered Tarquin to bring them tea and coffee. "And some of those Prince of Wales organic biscuits. Have you got that? Now be quick. Oh, totally useless, that boy. He'll have to go." Villiers shook hands. "Macey, Kirill, good to see you again. Just flown back from New York. Bit tired. My people tell me that the website hasn't had any more of those messages. Good news from your side, I hope?" "Yes and no, Sir Gilbert," Kirill said. "Dr. Marsden, we hope you can stay. We thought with your experience you might be able to help on some technical questions." "Well, of course, I'd be delighted." Tarquin brought in a tray and left. Marsden poured tea and coffee. He looked very smooth and pleased with himself. Macey remembered all the trouble he had caused and decided it was time to begin his punishment. "First, some good news for you, Sir Gilbert. You have a totally loyal management team. I interviewed Inovix, Mishkovich and Fitzroy. They have nothing but respect and admiration for you. Your problems are elsewhere." Macey started to tell Villiers about her interview with Hoodjink, but after a while he cut her short. "I know about this, Macey. Roy spoke to me on Friday, and I have to say I agree with him. That was not a sensible thing to do. I don't see why you had to deliberately antagonize him. He's enough trouble as it is. What in concrete terms have you actually found out?" "Quite a lot, but we should get more background from Kirill first of all. Kirill?" "Sir Gilbert, how long were you at the Tuf diamond mine in Kazakhstan?" Villiers thought for a moment. "About 6 months, I think. Not long after it had opened. It was a bit of a disaster for the company, really. At first we were getting a good return on investment, but the diamond vein ran out quite quickly, so we closed it down again some years after I left, as soon as we had reached the break-even point." The stones were top-notch, just not enough of them. Why? Were there any problems that you were aware of? Environmental ones, I mean? Not that I remember. I mean, it wasn't my responsibility, but as you know, I've always had an interest in the subject, so I saw the final environmental impact report. There was nothing there that worried me. I don't understand. Has something turned up? Because if so, I need to know about it. The anxiety lines around his eyes seemed suddenly deeper. That's right, Kirill, and I hope you have solid evidence, added Marsden. It's no good relying on hearsay. Marsden was enjoying himself. It was almost more entertaining than getting money out of pop starlets. Maybe you remember somebody who was there at the same time as you, Sir Gilbert. Sergei Vasiliev, asked Kirill. He was a computer specialist there at the time. His wife and child died. Oh, God, yes. Poor man, it was terrible. I seem to remember he had a nervous breakdown and got all paranoid and said 7 Continents was responsible. Very sad, but there was absolutely no truth in it. Are you saying that you went all the way to Kazakhstan to interview a madman? Added Roy. I can't imagine you think this was a useful way to spend Sir Gilbert's money, Miss Fiorentina. Let them finish, Dr. Marsden, said Carly calmly. It's all leading somewhere. Be patient, please. That's right, Roy, continued Macey. You see, Sergei Vasiliev collected evidence which he entrusted to you, didn't he? But you sat on it. You decided something like this could be useful for your own purposes. So rather than help the people who were damaged by poison from the mine, you buried the evidence, didn't you? What are you talking about, Macey? Asked Villiers. What's going on here? There was a knock at the door, and Irina, dressed in a grey pinstripe suit with her hair up and carrying a briefcase, came in and sat down next to Kirill. Villiers looked astonished and jumped up. Irina, what on earth are you doing here? I'm here to represent Sergei Vasiliev, Gilbert. I'm afraid he can't be here. He was thrown off his balcony in Doshk last Friday night. Irina spoke totally without emotion, as if she was saying Sergei had caught a cold. Macey looked at Marsden. He'd suddenly gone very pale. Irina opened her briefcase, took out a thick brown paper envelope, and stared at him. Dr. Marsden, the last thing Sergei Vasiliev did was to send Kirill an email telling us that you were in possession of the material that he had uncovered about pollution from the 7 Continents diamond mine at the Tuf Oasis. She opened the envelope. Doctor's report, geologist's report, soil analysis. Familiar with these documents, Dr. Marsden? I've never seen them before in my life, mumbled Marsden. Well, that's strange, continued Irina coolly, because you've written notes all over them, and you put your signature here when I collected them this morning for delivery to Piet Hoodjink, Durban Diamonds. Here, Gilbert. See for yourself. You were the courier, gasped Marsden. Irina simply scowled. For about 5 minutes there was complete silence as Villiers looked through the papers. Marsden slumped back down into his chair, looking as if he was going to faint. Macey poured him a glass of water. Villiers, who had totally ignored the scene and continued reading, finally looked up. "Why, Roy? Why? We were friends. We were about to win the biggest contract ever. Why did you betray me like this?" Marsden said nothing. He rested his head in his hands and started to cry. There was something awful in the sight of a man so completely destroyed. But then Kirill remembered Sergei and continued. "Dr. Marsden was being blackmailed, Sir Gilbert. He has a gambling addiction, and round about 2 years ago he ran up enormous losses. To cover them, he siphoned off donations to eco-warriors. Hoodjink found out somehow and offered to help him cover up before the auditors noticed a hole in the books. In return, Marsden has been feeding him business information about 7 continents ever since. When the Ekaterina messages started appearing, Marsden guessed their source immediately and told Hoodjink. Hoodjink was very excited about the opportunities it gave to put pressure on you. Dr. Marsden had met Sergei at an environmental conference in Doshk, and he thought, like everybody else, that he was mad. But when Sergei sent the documents, he realized that it was potentially very bad publicity for 7 continents. But Dr. Marsden was clever. He didn't say anything to Hoodjink straight away. He waited until he knew Hoodjink would be desperate for information about what you were doing. And that came with the opportunity to start mining in Antarctica. He knew this was something special, so he didn't ask for a one-off payment. He wanted a percentage share in the profits from the mine in Antarctica. Hoodjink, of course, would have torpedoed your bid for the mining contract in Antarctica by releasing the papers to the press. Marsden hadn't handed them over yet because he was still negotiating terms. But it was only a matter of time. We were very lucky that we got to them first. "But what about this man, Vasiliev?" asked Villiers. "Irina, you said he'd been thrown off his balcony. Do you know this for sure?" Kirill and Irina both nodded. "I didn't know that would happen, I swear," interrupted Marsden. "I thought Hoodjink would pay him to go away. I just warned Hoodjink that Solokov had found out who Ekaterina was." Villiers looked at them. "But how do you know all this? How did you find it out?" Macey coughed. "Well, I have certain computer skills, Sir Gilbert. So I hacked into Roy's private email account last night, and I sent him an email which looked as if it came from Hoodjink, offering him 0.1% of the profits from the Antarctica mine in exchange for the TUF file." "Isn't that illegal?" asked Villiers. "Strictly speaking, yes," answered Carly on Macey's behalf. "And I should just point out that we definitely do not encourage our employees to do this sort of thing. However, in this case, I don't think Dr. Marsden will want to go to the police about it. It really remains up to you, Sir Gilbert. What do you want to do next?" Chapter 26. The Last Message. Macey looked around the crowded restaurant. It was packed with 7 continents employees, celebrating a surprising triumph. The newspapers had been full of an incredible story, or part of it at any rate. Sir Gilbert Villiers had gone to the United Nations in New York, with the contract to mine for diamonds in Antarctica practically in the bag. Durban Diamonds had suddenly withdrawn their bid. Nobody knew why. Piet Hoodjink, the head of the London office, had been fired, and in the same week the European head of eco-warriors, Dr. Roy Marsden, had resigned. Rumour had it there was a police investigation going on into misappropriation of donations to the charity. A new head had been appointed and was promising a radical rethink of the organisation's mission. But what had really grabbed global headlines was what Villiers had done in New York. Large parts of the speech he gave at a news conference were played again and again on the news. It's not what we take from the planet that our children will thank us for. It's what we protect for them, it's what we treasure and preserve that future generations will look at and say, this is what our forefathers taught us to value. For this reason, I withdraw the 7 continents bid to mine for diamonds in Antarctica. And I urge the United Nations to guarantee for all eternity that this last great wilderness is protected from commercial mining, however sustainable its proponents claim it could be. And the United Nations had promptly followed his advice. Politicians formed disorderly queues in order to be photographed with Villiers, and the tabloid newspapers stopped calling him Sir Gilbert and changed it to Saint Gilbert in all their headlines. He, however, refused to be drawn into any sort of high-profile environmental campaign and announced that he was going to take a 3-month break from work. When asked why, he simply said, to spend time with my family. The restaurant party for the entire staff at headquarters was a way for Villiers to thank the employees for their support before he took his long holiday. Macey, Kirill and Irina sat with Tatiana as guests of honour at Villiers' table, though they had very little chance to talk to him. Employee after employee came up to shake his hand and check anxiously that he really intended to come back after 3 months. Nancy Inovix spent a lot of time with Macey, as did Eamon Fitzroy, while Dmitry Mishkovich sat and asked Irina and Kirill about the mine at Duf. It's terrible what happened. I knew the manager. He was a good man, I thought. He retired last year, very terrible. And he shook his head sadly. But as the party wore on and the drinks flowed, he became more cheerful, and even sang some songs, until everybody asked him to stop. At one point Gilbert came over to Kirill. There was one thing that I never understood. Who killed the chickens? I can't imagine Roy doing that. Kirill smiled. No, not really his style, is it? There was a reference in one of the emails we looked at. That Friday, when we came down for the weekend, Marsden told Hoodjink we were all there, and he organised for somebody to be outside when Marsden left to drive back to London. Marsden showed him where the hen coop was and pinned the card to the outside. It was all designed to put pressure on you. Poor chickens, said Villiers. How cruel. By the way, Kirill, that necklace of Irina's... But then another guest came up and they had to leave the conversation unfinished. Late in the evening, Macey and Tatiana found Irina looking pensively into the distance. "What's the matter, Irina?" asked Macey. "Is it Sergei?" "Yes," she sighed. "The last 2 weeks here with Catherine and Pavel were so wonderful. I cannot imagine how awful it must have been for Sergei, all those years without Ekaterina and Anastasia, and when nobody believed what he said, and we all, me too, just thought he was weird. And I think about those last moments in his apartment. It's too horrible." Tatiana put her arm around her sister's shoulder. "But the police reopened the case, didn't they? And they've arrested 2 gangsters in Doshk, Gilbert told me. And Irina, don't you think that what you, Macey and Kirill achieved has probably brought rest to the 3 of them? I think so." She crossed herself rapidly 3 times. Macey decided to change the topic. "Kirill said he was going to take a holiday and fly back to Kazakhstan with you. That should be nice." Irina went bright red, and Macey realized that Irina had not yet told her sister of this plan. "Oh yes, it's to visit the Kirkerman again. Kirill told me that Gilbert wanted us to ask them what 7 continents could do for them to compensate for the damage the mine caused, and as he can't speak the language, he asked if I could maybe come along." Irina tried to pick up her glass and only succeeded in knocking wine all over the tablecloth. Tatiana looked at her sister, threw back her head and laughed, then hugged her. "Good luck, little sister. I hope you do better than I did. Just don't listen if he starts talking nonsense about careers." Gradually the guests started to go until finally Villiers was able to call for the car that would drive him, Tatiana, Irina and Kirill down to the country. Macey was asked if she wanted to come, but she declined. "No, I don't think so, thank you. My cat needs someone to talk to." Her taxi came and took her home. As Kirill helped Tatiana on with her coat, Villiers held out Irina's for her. "Irina," he said, "that necklace, can I look at it?" She took it off and handed it to him. He held it up to the light and looked at it carefully. "Irina, do you know what you're wearing?" Irina laughed. "Oh, quartz crystals and little gold beads. Pretty, isn't it? I was given it by the Kirkerman." "Why do you ask?" "What did they say when they gave it to you?" Irina thought for a bit. "Oh, something silly. It was Roxana. She said I should sell it when I wanted to marry." "I see," Villiers replied. "Well, I think that's a good idea, but before you decide to get married, I suggest you look after that necklace very carefully." He leant forward and whispered in her ear, "You're wearing 6 large, rough diamonds around your neck, and each one is probably about 30 carats when properly cut. You're a very rich woman." When Macey got back to her flat, she found she couldn't sleep. She pottered around, playing with her cat and watering her plants, all of which had been ignored over the previous few weeks. Her mind turned over and over the events. Strange how things could change so quickly. New friendships form, and old ones break apart. Marsden had been such a big part of Villiers' life. She was sure Tatiana would not regret his disappearance. And Macey had the feeling that Tatiana would also be pleased if something developed between Kirill and Irina. She changed into some pyjamas and made herself some herb tea that a friend had sent to her after a visit to a yoga retreat in Venice. Perhaps she should visit Second Life and thank Captain Orbis. She hadn't returned there yet. She switched on her computer. For no particular reason, she clicked onto the Seven Continents website and scrolled through the pages where everything had started. It was an interesting phenomenon that the more respectable the company, the more boring their website. She clicked on a link that promised a company news update. On it were highlights of Villiers' speech and some selected quotes from the great and the good, praising this wonderful example of corporate responsibility. Macey yawned and was about to click to Second Life when she jumped, spilling hot tea on her lap. But she barely noticed the pain, for there at the bottom of the page she read, "My name is Ekaterina. I am 11 years old. I am at peace. Thank you." There will be one more episode 14, which will be coming out next week, in which I will tell you something about the background to the story Seven Continents. So if you're interested in my particular creative process, listen in. Now, if you've been following this season of Behind the Bottom Line, I'm sure you're thinking that as this is the season of goodwill and generosity, that it might be nice to do something for James, as he has given you so much pleasure over the past few weeks. And maybe you are thinking, what could I do for him? So here are a couple of tips that will have me curling my toes in pleasure. First of all, I would love a review from you on my website. That's www.behindthebottomline.com. And at the top of the web page you can see a tab which says Leave a Review. And if you wrote something about the season or Behind the Bottom Line in general, that would be great. The second thing you can do is to buy a well-deserved present for yourself or someone you like by going to my bookshop on the website. That is also a tab on my web page. You could buy the ebook version of Seven Continents or the print version of Seven Continents. And you can also find some of my other books there, including Peril in Venice, a thriller full of drugs, murder and adventure, set, as you might guess, in Venice, Italy, not California, and also a romantic comedy, Double Trouble. Nicholas and Timothy Aldridge, identical twins with very different lifestyles, change places and cause huge amounts of trouble before finding fortune and true love. So that should be your next destination, but I hope that I will see you again next week, and until then, take care and goodbye.